of the Finance Committee.
Oh.
Oh, there we go. All right. Present are committee members O'Brien, Farrell, Clears. Jamel's not here tonight.
Do you guys want, anybody want to sit over on this side?
Also present is President Pro Tem Kimbrough, Ms. Fahey, Mr. Inani, Mr. Hoey, and I think that that's it. So, the reason for this meeting is because I've voiced some frustrations about the budget and the amendments, and I'm realizing I should have asked Dorsey to provide this too.
Michelle? Or?
Oh, Michelle, that's right. And it was suggested that, and some of it was about the fact that we not getting answers to some questions. So it was suggested that we bring Mr. Bennett and Mr. Wheeler in to go over some of the questions and concerns that we have. And there's quite a few. What I would like to do is lead off. I do want to note that yesterday, Mr. Wheeler provided us with a insert for page 84, I believe it is, where the reduced debt service payment appears, and he has suggested adding a debt reserve, a footnote. I should have brought my magnifying glass again. Debt reserve payment, a $1.8 million debt reserve payment will be applied to the full $17,500,000 serial bond debt obligation, resulting in a net operating fund payment of $15,205,000. Amongst the questions, I think that council members, a number of people have been raising with me that we haven't gotten into very much is concerns about the raises that are in the budget that are not really mentioned in the mayor's budget message, and people asking how is it that it's decided that some people get a 1% and other people get a 5, 10, 15, 40% raise.
This year, as different from previous years, is there was a full evaluation process where the department heads were submitting personal evaluations of their employees with recommended promotions, raises. The mayor had even done this herself for her staff. So we really went with the guidance of the departments when it came to who was getting across the board and who maybe was getting more. It was all based on performance evaluations. Some departments did them very well across the board. When we pushed back, we kind of, it was like, we can't give this to everyone, and then the selection process just kind of drove down from there.
Can I ask a question regarding that? There's at least 2 departments that just got the standard 1% raise, the city auditor and recreation. Is there any reason why they didn't quite meet the standard?
Actually, ransoms should be a 3% raise, so that we did put that on the amendments. For Sue's other staff, 2 of those individuals did receive mid-year raises, so they received a 1% on top of mid-year raises. And the only position that just a 1% was given to was a new position that was a recent hire within the department.
But rec, as I recall,
Rec did not submit evaluations or a recommendation for raises.
That's a surprise.
So can we presume from that that everybody who got a 1% raise did not get great evaluations?
Not necessarily. Some of them just did general evaluations with an ask of 5% was most common throughout the departments. It was really with dialogue with the departments to break down to kind of expand on really what, maybe what made others stand out more than some, but many just did basically a basic, good grades, good evaluation, standard grades across the board. So clearly, we just were not in a position to do 5% throughout the city across the board.
Mike, there are some raises though that are, what are some of the highest increases?
Well, when you look at the mayor's office, it really is a matter of these, I'm sure, are being viewed as raises, but essentially they're promotions. Brian is going to be leaving, doing that majority of that constituency work and focusing on really these large projects that we have going on. He really is going to be essentially COO of the city, where he's monitoring the larger projects, the bigger picture, driving home the big initiatives. It's going to be much more responsibilities for him, much higher expectations. The mayor was very clear in her evaluation from Brian what was expected, and they are big asks and big goals. I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel files, but just so you know, his role is going to be expanding. His responsibilities are going to be expanding. And with him leaving that constituency-based work, it opens up an opportunity for David to assume those chief of staff duties, and the deputy position was eliminated. And the other larger raises in the mayor's office were due to really an increase in hours worked. One position is going from 20 to 30 hours, and one position is going straight part-time to full-time.
And if I could just comment, as it relates to the raise and specifically with Brian Shea to do constituent service, I've done when I was working at the legislature, I was a constituent service kind of person. I believe in constituent service. I mean, there are several times you call certain department heads and you don't get an answer. So it's my hope that with this new position that Brian is going to be in, the buck has stopped somewhere. Sometimes when you call for services or when you call them for something to be done about an issue, specifically even right now with some of the transformation of the LED lights from National Grid to the city owning it, you don't know who to contact. You have to write a letter. You have to write this. You have to write this. So I'm a big supporter of this position now, where I'll be able to contact, the director of operations and say, look, all right, can we get this done? So I don't mind that type of raise in that position, because again, as council members, most of our complaints are quality of life issue based, and it's very important to see that we have someone who's designated to focus on those type of issues.
But that's not, Brian's not doing that anymore.
Brian will be doing
That's what
that
he's gonna be doing.
in terms
No,
of,
that's not what-
David is really going to assume much of that. Brian will
Yeah,
be doing.
David's doing
Brian
it.
will be doing that as it relates to these large projects.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So in other words, Brian would be doing that in terms of, as Awusu said.
For street lighting
for
and things like
streetlights.
that, yeah, Brian would be your go-to contact on those.
I'm so sorry, I'm texting you about a street light in your word right now.
So that
Is it on Park Ave?
It's
Right now, we're
missing
going to
word.
plan
You know,
to
okay.
deal with streetlights.
Right.
So we're switching over to Ron.
Yeah, we're also looking to hire an energy manager as well. That's going to be in with Anne Marie's group in the lean group, because it's really more of a project manager. But that, we really need that person to kind of be those boots on the ground. Wendell is doing a fantastic job of managing a program. As far as installation goes, I know there's
Well, I had to
frustration.
wait 3
I know there's
months
frustration with,
to get a whole street.
Who's Wendell?
relit.
They're the company that's doing the actual installation of the lights. And
Well,
so,
I wouldn't say they're doing a fantastic
Well,
job,
they're-
at least not from what I saw.
right, because you're having frustration with
I have,
lights that are out.
I had a lot of frustration with lights that are out too, to be honest, on Manning and on Washington Avenue. You know, so I understand they're behind, they're trying to.
There's a schedule.
But
Yep.
no, these are lights
Repairs.
that go out to replace existing lights. It's been a slow
I'm saying that
process.
they're still on the schedule. They're
I
following the schedule.
I understand
They're
that.
about halfway through the
That's to
schedule.
replace.
There
Not
is
on
a-
repairs.
But what about when the light goes out?
You mean the
It's not on the
new
schedule.
lights that are going out?
No.
You're talking
I
about,
was
you're talking about the old lights.
I'm talking about replacing old lights. Oh, just getting them back up to service.
It's a little
been slow.
unclear in
Wait, hold
some
on, hold on.
cases.
So I'm really confused. Okay. So the old lights, if it's out right now, do we still contact like planning department to kind of, because they're not installing the old light, they're still installing the new lights for some of the old lights. So you can't just call and expect it to be done tomorrow.
Yeah, I was under the impression that Chris did have a contact point for those old.
There's a report form you can pull down from the city website, which is what we've done, but it didn't work.
I mean, he did take care of the ones
No.
it's taking time, but the two on Manning did get taken care of before Halloween. Because we normally get like,
But it shouldn't take
Thousand kids.
it shouldn't take 3 months to relight an entire block.
so, I mean,
Okay.
it is taking a long time. So I don't know if you can put some fire under them.
They've done half a city in about 5 months.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about the expanding and the renewal. I'm talking about dealing with maintenance of old lights.
But what I'm saying is
That's-
that they are on the schedule for the. Okay. So they are, sorry, they
If you
are.
have no lights, you have 2 lights out on
Yeah, but
Washington
not for
Avenue.
Well, but I'm-
maintaining existing
for
lights that
6
have no
weeks.
schedule.
It becomes a problem. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not, it's not
So
a...
just for point of clarification, and maybe we need to speak to planning, but from my understanding, I
Planning
believe
didn't
that.
respond.
Okay, what I'm saying is this, if there's a light that is out right now, the conversion that's taking place, if they get to it, that's when they're going to,
I understand that, but you have no light. For how many weeks are you not supposed to have any light? All I'm saying is, and I spoke to Chris about this before Halloween, and he said that he's got them shifting from expanding to dealing with some of these outlights right now. That's what he told me before Halloween. And the lights on Manning got taken care of, so I believe it. So
So
hopefully some of these
They
other
did.
lights have been taken
maybe
care of.
perhaps,
There's a
because we,
mechanism then, so yeah.
Kelly and I were talking about doing some targeted caucuses where we bring different departments in. Maybe we need a targeted caucus on the lights, since it seems like that's,
Yeah, and this
I
is really
think
kind
so.
of outside
yeah,
of my
this is more about
scope.
budget than
Because
like,
this
but
is-
it does seem like,
This is a finance.
I know, I'm like, he's ready to sit down. I'm like,
As much as I love being in the complaint department,
You can get up there on the ladder, Mike, come on.
I'll be at your house tomorrow with my ladder.
I wish I could do that.
Could you do that tonight, actually? Mike?
Yes, I'd rather be doing that.
Oh, you did that? That's in this? Terrific.
certified.
Oh, okay. And I gotta say,
I just go up and just build nice.
Second to last page.
All right, that's definitely not
Does not
budget.
belong to you.
That's
what
the
you're
one
saying.
way thing, right?
That explanation you
Yeah,
gave
yeah,
about
that's the one.
those bigger salary jumps, that we're this far into the process, and that's the first time we're hearing that explanation. I'm just wondering if there could be something put in place so that when there's those kind of increases, that we get that information sooner, or, I don't know.
Well, honestly, we sent out those raises and those promotions pretty early on.
No, I'm talking about the rationale for that.
Yeah, I kind of was expecting more of a back and forth than we've had about that.
Earlier, you mean?
Yeah, earlier than this.
Okay,
yeah.
because, not all the council members are here, but I think there are probably some others who are wondering.
And I will say that myself and the creation of a deputy under me too, we're a couple of the larger ones. We are really expanding our role. We are taking purchasing directly under us. We're also heavily involved, getting heavily involved with Anne Marie's office and really working on process efficiencies within the department. So our scope and our role is expanding as well. And on top of the fact that we spend most of our days problem solving with the department. So it's really something that I don't think people realize the work that we do and what we're putting into it, but we still continue to grow and expand. We also eliminated 2 of the CFMs out in the departments to create more of a centralized budget office who will act as the CFMs in the departments. After 3 years now, with the system working the way it does and having built those relationships with the departments, we really felt like having the CFMs in those departments were kind of getting swallowed up by the minutia of the day-to-day, and we're really pulling back to focus on some of the larger processes and efficiencies that we're going to move moving forward. So it really is just the 3 of us now focused on some of the city's larger issues.
Thank you.
So to follow up to that, Mike, I think because what we hear is that there's a perception that there are only there's a certain amount of people, not amount, but there's a certain class of people or workers in the city that are worthy of these significant raises. And, in terms of morale, and people being disgruntled, it creates this breeding ground for people to be upset, to say, our work isn't valued in the same way because we get these small, minute raises, while in other parts of our city hall, there are these big jumps in terms of work. And I'll just note that even when our new clerk, when she started, she was hesitant to come before us to propose a certain salary for her staff, because in some departments there's a sentiment that they can't ask for more, whereas other departments come in here like police and fire and they just ask for whatever they want, and they get it. And so how do we create a culture here in the city where everyone feels that their work is valued and they're compensated for what they bring to the table? Because I hear you. I think I agree that people should be compensated for their expertise and capacity and the work that they do, but that doesn't always trickle down, because it sounds like there are a lot of workers that are punching above their weight here. Punching above their weight, doing a lot of work, but that doesn't always translate to a significant salary.
The best way for those individuals to be recognized is to really be championed by their department heads. And not championing for someone who's been here a few months, frankly, and not championing for those who receive mid-year raises on top of it, or themselves. But yeah, that's the mechanism. That's why the evaluations were created, and that's why, and that's really the best way to go about it.
So does it make sense at some point to consider a specific person, maybe in HR, who makes recommendations about raises? Because if we leave it up to the department heads, it's based on their perception. So for example, as I mentioned with our clerk, she was under the impression that, I don't want to, the city is strapped for cash, I don't want to ask. And we had to literally push her to ask for raises. So when you leave it up to the discretion of the department heads, people go without.
I think that's really a kind of a legacy mindset. We've certainly worked with the departments to bring up some of the lesser raises, to reward and promote those who take much larger responsibilities and much larger roles within their organization. So this is all a work in progress to get to this point. And one of the big things why we felt the evaluations are so important, because it was a lot of word of mouth, he said, she said, and we really needed to start ranking, identifying, and so this is the first year of building on something new. So the goal is to get all the employees right-sized and evaluated to their contributions, to their skill sets, to their educational levels, to where they should be within the context of the larger organization. And starting with these evaluations and really pushing back and working earlier with the departments is hopefully what's going to lead us to that goal. So we certainly understand, but I will say in any organization, whether it's here, whether it's a private sector, whether it's in education, whenever the perception is that those who are above us are reaping the rewards of the work and we're not getting anything is kind of generally how it goes. But you have to understand these things are evaluated primarily based on level of responsibility, level of education, who's been stepping up over a long period of time. That is really where these decisions are being made.
Yes.
But I do agree with you and that's where the evaluation is the first step towards centralizing that process to where raises will be justified and ranked and moving towards a system like that. But this was really the first year we introduced that type of system, but we do plan on continuing to build on that, making that more efficient and wider reaching and encouraging departments to not have that mindset of I shouldn't ask, but to have that mindset of I should fight.
And I think that is key here, in addition to the raises, is changing the mindset and the culture here, because everyone says, oh, we're strapped for cash. I don't want to put more pressure on the city, but then there are others who just come in and say, we're going to go for the gusto and we're going to throw everything on the wall and see what we
Go for the
get.
gusto, and it does tend to be people at the upper levels. We are increasing the income gap in our city significantly from what I am seeing, and that's part of the problem here. At one point when I worked for the state, they gave everybody like a minimum of like a $500 increase because they were recognizing that these 1% raises were just accentuating the income gap between the people at the lowest end. Because if you are making $30,000 a year, just a little over, minimum wage, you get a whopping $300 more per year. Like, what does that buy? And in the meantime, even a 1% for somebody at $100,000 is $1,000 raise. And then when you turn that into, well, these people at the highest level are all getting $5,000 raises.
And the fire chief gets a $9,000 this year, and he got a $9,000 last year. Did he improve that much more in 2 consecutive years?
It's really
I think his duties remain the same.
with fire. It's about bringing those raises up from where they were very low compared to other municipalities and to police command staff. So it really was bringing in parity for the fire command staff.
But we don't
And-
use that
and-
argument across the board. That's the thing.
Yeah.
We use it for certain positions,
Well,
but that argument
here's a
isn't made
unique
across the board.
situation with police and fire command. Is their subordinates who are still in the union generally are making, especially in fire's case and police, their subordinates are making significantly more money than they are.
Right.
It's very difficult to attract talent to move up to the command level. And it's vital that we have the best from the ranks rising to the top, and we're not necessarily seeing that consistently enough to build a really high functioning command staff, and that's really the basis behind that with fire, and what the basis has been with police as well is and really why, even when you look at DGS supervisors, why we had to raise their salaries so much when we negotiated the last union, because their subordinates were making more than them. We have to have an organization where leadership rises to the top, talent rises to the top, and not make it prohibitive to jump those levels because you're going to make less money to do so. That's just not, you're never going to attract the talent that you need to be successful that way.
And I don't think you would hear any disagreement from council members about that. What I am saying, and what I hear other colleagues saying is that, but it has to be equitable and fair, and some of these rationales are applied to specific partners and positions.
But there are
That's the problem.
there are unique situations and unique circumstances to each department in which is why those answers are are different because the issues and problems are different. It's hard to just do a sweeping equity move across the board that affects everyone in a way that makes it equitable, frankly. Each department has a unique set of circumstances that require some different techniques to getting them pushed to where you want them to be professionally. And fire and police are the biggest examples of that. Is because you cannot have true leadership and talent rise to the top when there's no incentive for the lower ranks to go for those goals.
And yet,
And I'll just say that no one is saying that there should be equality. The difference with equity meaning is based on those unique situations. So you can still take an equitable approach, and it doesn't mean that it's just broad sweep that you don't take into consideration.
And the
nuances.
evaluations really are our first step towards building those tools that we need to reach that equity.
Thank you. Alfredo, I'm sorry.
I guess my question, I'm okay with people getting raises. I think people should. And I'm more concerned with the fact that we have so many people we have 6, if you go down to DGS, we have 6 custodial workers making $30,000. We have clerks that are the front line, and we take a lot of hits from our, residents. They take even more, whenever anything, and they're making $30,000, $33,000, $32,000. I mean, we're asking these individuals to live in our city. It's a requirement to live in our city, yet we're not paying them an affordable salary to live here. And for me, $32,000, that's not really affordable to live in this city. And I understand we have budget crunches, and I do. And I understand some of these are union positions. But I would like us to be more intentional in when we're looking at these lower wages individuals, see how we can
These
get them to...
These positions in this organization and every organization are designed as entry-level positions. If the way that people can succeed in this city and any organization is to move through the levels. Those positions are meant for where you start with the organization. And this is now our 3rd consecutive year of across-the-board raises. We really have picked some of these very low raises to give them a little bit more each year over the last 3 years. So we do recognize that issue, but it also has to be understood, and not to sound cold, but these are entry-level positions where it's your foot in the door to prove yourself, to move up that ladder, to get to where you want to be based on the efforts that you put in, based on your talent, your skills, your education, your work ethic. All those things will determine where you go within the organization.
That's a dangerous mindset to have.
That's
Because it
how
promotes this
successful
pull,
organizations
but
operate.
It promotes that pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality, and we recognize that there are factors that prohibit people from rising through the ranks, going to get education. And so if you apply that logic, there's some people who retire in these entry-level positions. So is it that they are not worthy because they stayed
which
at
is
the
why
entry level?
we've added additional dollars for training, for tuition reimbursement. We are looking to invest more into our
But there are
employees.
still barriers.
And what if
Even
they-
when you provide those incentives, there are still barriers that keep certain people from rising. So the same argument was made when people were fighting for $15 for employees working at McDonald's and other fast food restaurants. That, these are entry level, and what we found is that there were a lot of adults with children working at these restaurants, not just high school students or college students. And so that is a dangerous mindset to have, and it's not taking into consideration the realistic aspects of our workforce. There are some people who retire in these entry-level positions, and they retire making $30-something thousand.
Well,
And the starting place is already at a disadvantage.
The goal
$30,000.
is that we identify, we invest, and we move them into situations where they can be successful. The goal is to get that for everyone to have the same opportunities. And certainly, I understand that there are issues that hold some back more than others, but the goal is still to create an organization where working together, we can bring people from the beginning up through the organization, and at the same time, still recognize what they are achieving, what their contributions are, and we plan to continue to give across-the-board raises, and we plan to use the evaluations to identify these people who really do work hard, who may have issues or circumstances that hold them back. No one is saying we don't want to advance all of our workers. I'm just kind of giving a general sense of really what the organizational structure and most organizational structures are built for. And many of these positions at the bottom are designed as a starting point. But I agree with you. We have to look at ways that we can help people advance. We have to look at ways that we can invest more in them. We have to look at ways that maybe have life situations that make it very difficult, that you can't go back to school, that you just don't have the time or the money to really do that. We are looking at more ways to look at those who make the least in the city and bring them along. But the real goal is to get them into these positions, invest in them, and move them along by succeeding within the organization and moving forward.
Can I just make a comment?
Wait, I just want, Alfred, are you done?
I just wanted to follow up with saying, I think someone who's taking these calls for DGS, where they've been there 1 year or 5 years, deserves to be making more than $33,000. I think the bottom line is we are asking these people to live in our city. We're demanding that for them to be employed. You can't rent an apartment anywhere with a family, a 3-bedroom, for anything less than $1,200. That is almost 3/4 of their pay when you're making $32,000. Your take home without health insurance is roughly $1,600. So I know that because I've lived that. So when we're asking these people to live in our city, and we've got to pay it so they can survive.
A living wage.
Yeah, and if I could just make a comment.
We're telling them
to work here, so.
If I can make a comment too, this notion of an escalating pyramid defies logic, because you have so many more people on the bottom that there aren't enough of those equitably good-paying positions for more than 1/10 of them to ever aspire to. And it still doesn't explain the distinction between giving some guy at the top a 10% raise while the guy at the bottom still only gets 1%. It just doesn't follow that, oh, we're giving them opportunity and training. Well, you really got to give them pay too. And to me, it's very difficult to vote for a budget that has some glaring examples of people on the top, people close to the leadership, always getting the big raises. Whether they describe their duties differently from year to year to year, that just sounds like an excuse, really. And I find it very difficult to believe that the rec department, you know, like let's say that indeed they didn't recommend for some, you know, for something more than 1%. That should have, which I don't believe necessarily is what really happened. But even if that's the way it happened, somebody within the city organization should be looking at rec and saying, gosh, some of your people are doing a great job. Where are the, you know, if this whole payment is based on beautiful evaluations?
That's what the evaluations were for. Memos went out early on to all the departments in the process that there would not be raises above and across the board raised without evaluations. The rec department did not submit evaluations for their staff.
And nobody called them on that?
We said, yeah, of course. It's like, are you doing evaluations? And none came.
So the
What
low
about
level
the
suffer?
IT department? Did they provide evaluations?
No.
So I do want to, we're talking about these low salaries. Are people on a 40-hour work week or a 37.5-hour work?
It's across, some are 40, some are 37 and a half, a few are still 35. There's a range, a wide
Do
range.
we have any employees currently being paid less than $15 an hour?
There may, I think the janitors and DGS and the union, maybe. But I think we've done a pretty good job identifying all those that were outside the
What about
unions.
crossing guards?
Crossing guards, I believe, were right at that $15 mark, $14.90 something in the last contract, but we are renegotiating with them, I think, in the next couple of weeks, so they will be above that level after their next
Mike, has
contract.
there ever been any consideration to looking at, those lower level pay groupings of people, clerical series and so on and so forth? And what the cost would be to kind of raise that group?
Yeah, we really talk about that every year,
Okay.
and then the question is always, where do you stop? Because then you have this group that you've moved up, and now there's always this pocket of people that were just passed by those who were making less than them.
Long-range plan?
I think that's what we really need to look at, is how we can implement this in stages.
Because this comes up
that-
every
yeah, that
year.
really elevate-
All of us agree with
It's-
Alfredo. I mean, we want people to be able to live here.
Absolutely, and I agree that we don't suggest they live here, we make them live here.
It's something like this
Yeah.
should not necessarily be as a result of having a write-up on the person either. I mean,
No, that's just one component,
That makes perfect sense for an upper-level person if you're advocating for, your deputy to have higher pay. I think that's responsible. But if you're looking at you're making $30,000 a year, you just need more. I mean, there shouldn't necessarily have to be a piece of paper associated with it saying that, Ginny's great, she deserves a raise. Although, of course, anybody's welcome to do that.
And here's an oddity. So we have somebody who's a chief of staff in the mayor's office being elevated to be director of operations. And that is coming with 12-15% raise, something like that. And then we have, in DGS, we have a former director of operations that is being elevated to be a chief of staff.
No, it's assistant commissioner, shouldn't be chief of staff.
That's what it says here in the document that I got from your office. In any case,
It's not chief of staff, it's assistant commissioner.
so this person is moving to assistant
Correct.
commissioner.
But he's going from deputy of operations to a
But
higher.
very noteworthy in this is we have a few people here and then one person down here who is an event assistant who is taking on supervisory responsibilities and was moved up to confidential assistant, but everybody else is 1%. It's like, really? Not one of those people was worthy of more than 1%. So when when I worked for the state, there was a very detailed, you create expectations, you measure people against those expectations.
And that's the basis that our evaluations are made from.
And none of these people, I mean, I feel like that there's like people are raising the questions, and I feel like there's an inbred bias there that, a page like that just shows it, kind of, and that's part of the struggle, and I understand we have budgetary problems and giving people, most people a 1% raise, but then there are so many people who are getting significant bumps up, not 3%, not 5%, but 8, 10, 15, 30% and more. And how do you not feel devalued, as a city employee, and how do you even, have hope that you're going to get ahead in any way when you're being given essentially a $300 a year raise? And that's year after year. Some of the people that are being given raises up here got raises last year or the year before or 2 or 3 years before that were very significant. And these other people, and the mayor's budget message talks
Another
about.
time we have a union contract, and I understand that, but the other side of that is It seems.
This is the non-union.
Well,
Is that
even,
I'm
but I
pointing
will
to?
say, even like when we come to union positions and then it kind of ends the conversation, I feel like, I don't know any union if we said, like, listen, guys, this is just not okay. No union that I,
They're
and I've
refuse
met
it.
many of them, that they would say, no, we don't want an increase in pay. I mean, their contract, it would be separate from their contract negotiations, and I understand that might also put the city at a disadvantage in those contract negotiations, but the right thing is the right thing. And somebody making $30,000 a year is not the right thing.
I just got a
Yes.
fast question for Mike. Mike, what is the inflation rate these days? Because, I know it's more than 1%, is my imagination.
Yeah, it's back up to more of a standard 2, a little above 2%.
So what's bugging me is that we're not even helping them advance, they're actually falling behind, because inflation is hurting their salary. So if we're only offering, I like to see that, I think the city should give some kind of cost of living increase that would stay kind of close to inflation.
I agree that we are going to continue to give raises. I will say that prior to these consecutive years, many of these people had not seen raises in a decade. So we have turned around. We are working on turning around what was happening prior to us being here. I agree. We will keep looking to find ways to move people forward through the organization, because it is difficult to live in this city, certainly for $30,000. So
Now, I'm a union member, and just to let you, I work at the university, and we have a contract, but there's nothing stopping the university from giving us more money, and I don't know if that's the way our city contracts work, but, that's pretty much like Ginny said.
And I'm assuming
What-
your union wouldn't say, no.
No, and we do, and it does happen that, the president, does give people to get the salaries up. We're doing a big study right now, where, for inversion and, what's the other term? Salary compression, because people have been here 10, 15 years, new people come in, they're at a higher rate. So we're actually, in our latest contract, we have this algorithm worked out where we're gonna give people to try to get them up, and that's within the contract. So this is stuff that we should be, because I see turnover as a big problem in the city, and, even in the uniform services, I just heard another policeman's gone in. I know the number's way up there, and it's the institutional knowledge. When we lose these people, when they drop out, it costs a lot to retrain and get somebody in who knows what's going on.
I agree.
Yeah, there's never a vacancy rate at the high salaries. It's always at the underpaid. Critical people at the underpaid. Police officers, dispatchers.
Our legislative,
Our sanitation
Yeah.
workers, I mean, people.
Dispatchers actually with this contract are on par with the county.
So I'd like to move on to other questions and other issues. I think that we've made our points and position and concerns clear. One of the questions I have about the budget is, who drafted the mayor's budget message here?
The mayor's office is responsible for drafting the mayor with her office are responsible for submitting that. Budget does not write anyone's narratives, goals. We don't participate in that. Generally, the mayor's office with admin services will review those and edit and push back. Budget team does not, and we do not involve ourselves heavily into the narratives of the book.
So with regard to the change with regard to the debt service, would you consider that to be a major or significant change in the budget from last year?
I would consider it to be a different way of showing what has been a standard practice for decades, is how I would describe that.
A different way of,
of just showing in the budget a transaction that we have been implementing for decades. So, you know, one of the things that concerns me is every year we have our meeting with S&P, our bonding and ratings agencies, and one of the questions they ask is why is your budgeted revenue generally so much higher than your actual revenue, and that does work against your bond rating. But the big issue for us, well, you know, prior years.
your budgeted revenue.
Yeah, why is your budget revenue so much higher than the revenue that you actually brought in? We already have a built-in $3.5 million variance with the HUD requirement for putting in phase departments. So my concern because we were increasing the amount of debt reserve, my concern was that this variance now is going to increase another $800,000 on top of what we've already had to explain prior. And the reality is neither an interfund transfer hits the operating budget, nor does it remove dollars from the budget. The transaction works in a way that the debt reserve payment is made directly into our debt service liability. That reduces the liability needed in the general fund to satisfy the full liability. So really none of that transaction hits our operating funds. So for me, it was a matter of what is the best way for us to show how this transaction is occurring without it necessarily creating this variance within the budget. So I certainly understand why changing the way we have been doing it for a while, was certainly eye-catching. I don't necessarily agree that any of that surely should have went to the level that it did. I think we're basically talking about two different ways of doing the same thing. I prefer a way that doesn't necessarily artificially inflate the overall size of the budget. From my perspective, though, from a budgetary perspective, and not towards, just from the actual dollars, it's the same.
I'm satisfied with that.
It's the same, so.
Well, okay, so, but with regard to year, we are taking $800,000 more out of savings than we have in past years, out of the debt reserve fund.
Yeah, because we have more available in the debt reserve fund than we have in previous years.
And so, is that a major change? And we have put in, to the budget, we highlight things like we're spending $300,000 on the, training facility. We're spending $500,000 more, in street reconstruction. And
You're alluding to that we should have had that in the narrative in a debt service section explicitly stating that change. I agree.
So this is our city charter, and it says that the mayor needs to have a message accompanying her budget. The budget shall provide a complete financial plan for the ensuing fiscal year. And the message shall explain the important features of the budget, indicate any major changes from the current year in expenditures and revenues, together with the reasons for such change. Summarize the city's debt position and include such other material as the mayor deems desirable. That's consistent, essentially, with what OSC is talking to me about, which is two hallmarks of good budgeting is consistency and transparency. So especially if you're not going to have consistency from one year to another, then you be transparent. That is embedded in our charter. So I know that you and Mr. Shonifar think I have been making a mountain out of an anthill, as he says, but he doesn't mean to be dismissive of my comments. But there's no mention of the change in the budget as it was presented on October 1st. And the first time that there was any mention of it was when I came to you right after the mayor's budget presentation. I said, what's going on here? And then you came here and you did your presentation, and I have the slide here someplace, where you talk about the debt service going up by $2.7 million when it really is going up by $4.5 million. That is what I have difficulty with, is the fact that there was no mention whatsoever of this in the budget that we got, and it is a major change. And we expect major changes to be brought to our attention, not, I gotta say, swept under the rug and not even discussed. And that is a concern with a number of things that have gone on in this budget process. And I heard you say, I think directed at me, that you did expect for there to be more dialogue on the raises and whatever. But the reality is, I have given you a series, I have followed up on discussions. I know that scuttlebutt is in the mayor's office, that I'm asking for too much information, when indeed what I'm doing is I'm putting in writing as a courtesy, following finance committee meetings, the questions raised by my fellow council members, legitimate questions about this budget. And then we're not getting responses. So I don't know why we would have you come here and have a dialogue when we have questions that I sent you on October 10th that have not been answered yet. So, the comment, the suggestion that you expected more dialogue when we've asked questions and you said you would get us information, you will follow up on that. And I do the courtesy of providing you with a list. Nobody told me that you disagreed with the list. Nobody told me that you think we're asking too many questions. Go back to the drawing board and pick but so we were not being provided with answers to some of our questions. The administration has not been forthcoming on problems with some of the errors. And thus far, all I know about are the ones that I have identified. I assume that there's got to be other ones that I haven't identified with regard to.
The ones that we're looking to fix are what Nick has sent you, and that's what's been identified.
Which are all ones that I happen to have identified first.
Not necessarily. We clearly identified many of those because we had presented the corrected versions to be placed in the book that didn't get in there. So that's not accurate. So no.
You presented what?
Some of our corrections that we knew that were there in the book when we reviewed them, that we asked to have updated to the book, did not make it there in time in the book. So those were issues many of those were issues that were identified by us prior, but we did not have time to get those done.
Those were not mentioned in the mayor's presentation, and those were not conveyed to the council in any way when the budget was provided to us.
The turnaround was so fast. Many of them we also did not notice that were corrected until the next day when the book was finalized and sent out. We literally had a few hours to review the book. And when you really look at in its entirety, the amount of errors is less than what have been in previous years. So that's not really something that...
Some of these errors are pretty significant. In any case, with regard to what is required by the city charter, I don't see how we fix that in this budget. The mayor's message is there. I don't think that we're going to sit here and wordsmith her message. And frankly, I'll let other people talk. about their, anybody else have thoughts on what I'm talking about? Or
Well, it's a little bit different topic, but there are a couple of things I would like to see the budget spend money on that aren't being spent on, such as a modest increase in senior services. And that could be channeled through the Department of Recreation, which has certainly indicated an interest, to me anyway. That's why I find it baffling that they don't come to you, if indeed that is the case, and say, these are some of the things we want to do, and we need financing
Rec
to
has
do
not
that.
approached us about expansion of senior
Because they
services.
approached me about some of their wish list stuff, and it sounded very credible to me.
although that's in the mayor's budget message. We've allocated funding to further enhance our award-winning summer youth program, extend weekend hours in our community centers, and offer additional programming for our senior population. So that is a question I have, is where is the additional funding?
Not there.
Is,
And gosh, I mean,
One of the, I really would turn to rec to that, because one of the opportunities that they had when we moved their positions for parks to DGS was it freed up about $250,000 for them to focus on those. So rec did have the available funds to put it into programming where they wanted. As far as what's in the memo, I would reach out to rec to ask them where in senior services some of these dollars may have gone to. What I was really referring to was more of what we were looking for an increase to what we were giving for the centers for the aging, not necessarily with the rec programs.
but there has been no increase. It's been
Well,
flat for the past 10 years.
One of
At little less than 26,000.
Yeah, I think we have to do a larger evaluation on what's being provided by the county, what's being provided through rec already, and what the needs are. I'm not necessarily opposed to increasing that. We just want to know a better idea of what form that would take and where it would go and how and who would
I can
benefit.
give you some suggestions. Transportation to and from programs.
And one of the things that I thought was an opportunity potentially was, I know that we had the opportunity through legislation to increase what we're charging for birth and death records. To me, the increase in that revenue may be a good opportunity to fund something like that.
Or maybe the diminishing some of these 16% salary. Let me just give you an example. The city of Albany spends less than $26,000 a year for senior services budgeted. We are giving a pay increase to two people in the mayor's office for $10,000 more than what we pay our senior services in Albany. That just seems incongruous to me.
This is about investing in people who will be taking the city to another level.
Right, but I think our senior services are worth investing too, and we
I don't necessarily disagree with
that.
that, but you have to, these
Probably
decisions
have
are
at least
made.
25,000 of
These
that.
decisions
In other words, they're getting about
these decisions
$1 each.
these decisions are being made to invest into people that we would otherwise lose to other organizations, and that are vital to the success of what we're striving for.
So if I can, I'm trying to follow here, as it relates to starting from the mayor's presentation about the increase in funding for senior services, what I'm hearing, so to date, there has not been a specific increase allocated in this budget.
Rec did a pretty significant reorg of where they were moving people. I would refer back to rec for specifics necessarily where they use these dollars. Not only did they get a relief of $250,000, but they also were giving a slight increase in their overall budget. So I think that Justin or Jonathan can probably give you more of that detailed
Well, I
details
can
commission.
tell you what Jonathan said. Jonathan said that he uses some of his facilities, youth facilities for seniors, when the youth are not using them, and I give him credit for doing that. And he enlisted some free contributions from some not-for-profits to assist him in providing senior services. But in terms of increasing that $26,000 a year, it's stayed flat for 10 years. Despite, I mean,
Jonathan does not administer to that program, so I think we just need a better understanding of what exactly where that's going, what we're getting out of it, and what the needs are. So I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think we have to take a deeper dive into what that program is and what the needs really are.
So as the next step, are you suggesting that the council do the follow-up?
No, that's something that we could do,
Okay.
that we would do on the administrative end, and just take a deeper dive into it and see what opportunities might be there. I don't oppose increasing that if it's going towards something with real value. Sure.
Any other questions for Mike? It is 20 minutes to 8. Finance committee members, what do you want to do at this point?
well, do we have to strategize about the need for more meetings maybe, or just meetings to discuss?
Well, we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow. One of the things I would like to discuss at tomorrow's meeting, if we don't discuss it now, is the curbside waste collection fee legislation. Partially because that will need some amendments in order to be effective in the way the administration intends it to be effective. I have some suggestions. Richard has had some suggestions. There is an issue with regard to some people wanting to sunset, have another review of it in a few years. But with the amendment, since it's a local law, it can be amended at the next meeting. It cannot be voted on until the meeting after that. So I'm looking at the timing of that. So that's one of the things I'd like to talk about tomorrow. My general thought is that actual decisions on all of the bonding, I would like to keep that moving forward, but I don't think that we need to, that's not part of the budget process per se. While that was the goal, I think that we have so much on our plate between now and we need to make a decision about what we're going to be doing on the budget ordinance itself, a budget intent memo generally, and I think we should be making sure that we do something about the curbside waste collection fee, and if that's not going to be a pass with the 8 votes, then there's, that opens up another whole issue. But I generally feel like we probably do have one way or another the 8 votes for that as a $90 fee. I'd mentioned to Mike, I think to everybody, about the homestead, non-homestead resolution that we're going to have to pass. As it turns out, last year we did that by the second meeting in December. So what are people's thoughts? Tomorrow I want to focus on the trash fee and what we're doing about the budget and potentially budget intent memo. And do we want to act on that on Monday?
Well, my thoughts on the trash fee is I think we need a trash fee, but I would like to see a provision in there for evaluating it, not necessarily from year to year to year, but, not leaving it so open-ended that we can't change it up or down.
I have a very selfish interest in doing something that is at least 2 or 3 years.
Every 3?
2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Not every I don't know how we want to do it, but at least, my selfish interest is, I really don't like having to have the conversation with finding the 8 votes
Yeah.
every year and especially if we're keeping it if the legislation is to keep it at $90, then we make a decision at some point in the future if we want to change it. I know some members support pay as you throw, or do we, or increase it potentially, at some point. Certainly as we near the end of our landfill, I think we're going to have to get a little bit more real about what that means.
I agree with pushing out the sunset, but I think it is important to have a sunset. But I don't know that it's necessarily helpful to have the conversation every year, because then we don't actually, there's not the same incentive. It's almost like we're having the exact same thing with all these different potential ideas that could happen instead of a real direction of something happening, which ultimately I think that's one of the good things of having a slightly spaced out sunset, where we can say, we'll have a better idea of what's happening with the landfill, and it might be something where we have to start saying like, well, we're not doing this unless composting is involved or whatever. I mean,
are you indicating that you would favor like readopting this with having sunset language in there for 3 years from now or 4 years from now?
I would say, I wouldn't necessarily, I think 3 years is a good.
You would have a new council,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it would be after the first year of the new council.
Right.
I think that would, yeah.
Well, and that's true. That new council would then have to make a decision about extending it in their first term.
And what I would actually like to do, I think that we should be looking at it, so 4 years, the date of the landfill
Is 26.
is 26.
Late
Yes,
2026, which is what we
yeah,
were
so
told.
I just,
at a meeting
I hate
today.
to push it out to, just looking at that date, that's why I would more lean towards this 4 years.
So are we hashing this out now instead of tomorrow? And if so, we need to forego a meeting tomorrow. Is that the decision, that we're hashing this out now, or are we coming back tomorrow?
I think we need to come back tomorrow, and I think, what I'm basically saying to you guys, what do you want to do as next steps? Because I would like to hash out what we're doing about the budget intent memo, and the trash fee tomorrow.
So while we have Mike here, I'm sorry.
The sunset, 3 years, I think makes sense. I don't think we would have an issue.
And are there
with that.
any hard lines in the sand as it relates to the information that's been requested that may not have been provided? Because if we're planning to make decisions, and because information has not been provided, the sentiment is,
Well, there were some things like the 3 to 5 year plan that I had initially thought I'd be able to release out, but when I went back and started updating it, even some of the stuff with the landfill closure had changed since the last time I put it together. So there was so much that has to be updated and changed. It's going to have to be a document that I have to review with the mayor, redo the narrative, and then release that as a document later on. We really didn't get much back from our city engineer about your question about the reimbursement on the shared roads.
Yeah, that was something
So-
that was in the TU that said the legislature passed $1 per.
Yeah, we went through it and we
per
did it.
yard.
I think I want to say it was 70-something thousand. It would work out for us. Randy says it doesn't apply to us for those roads, but we wanted to get deeper dive
Jared is
into
the
it
one
and
who-
look at it.
Jared Pellerin is the one who researched it for us.
Okay.
He came out with the statute, and it did list a bunch of Albany roads, but I don't know whether it ever came out of the governor's office approved. Apparently, the
Yeah,
legislature approved the concept of $1 a yard per state road that the cities have to maintain.
Yeah, we certainly, we would, we're happy to take it, so.
Oh, yeah,
You know.
I
yeah.
might not have signed it yet.
But I would assume it's a
And
good chunk of
I
money.
just, you know-
I don't think, did we get an answer answer on projections for how the tax base will grow over the coming years?
No,
I thought Darius said he gave you that information the other night.
let me check on that.
Oh, is that what?
Yeah, that's not really something that that's really, we
Yeah,
rely
because
on the
there's gotta be a lot
assessor
of
and the
these
treasurer
tax
for that.
abatements
We
that
don't do
are-
those, we don't do that
that are
analysis at our
ending.
level. Yeah, and that's what we were looking for too, and what we had gotten was a pretty cumbersome report that we were having a difficult time really following when they're coming off, what the impact
Yeah.
would be. So we kind of referred that back to Darius, and he said he gave you an updated report. Was it, maybe it wasn't you, but I know
He
he,
did
right?
send us something, I think last Friday, and said spoiler alert or something like that.
Okay.
On it, and, or in it, or whatever, and I didn't connect it with this particular request.
Okay, I believe that
Myself.
is the information related to that request.
We have a planning committee meeting tomorrow, correct?
Yes, 15 minutes before, it's at 5:15.
5:15.
It's for the parking authority. Individual who's going to join the parking authority. Jennifer Saponis.
So do we have sufficient information to act on the budget intent memo and all these things that you're talking about, Judy? Because if not, we'd be holding off until we get the information being requested.
And have a special meeting for the budget? Because Monday's the normal time that we'd be voting on the budget, the 18th of November, but we don't have to.
I feel like we should, I think that we need to kind of go through things more carefully, and if we do need more information after tomorrow's meeting, I think that we can figure that out, but I do think that we need to kind of move, just, dig in and figure out next steps and things like that.
One of the questions that I had asked, and I finally figured out between the cracks or whatever, is when we were given the revised number for the retirement, and I asked the question about how did that, how did you arrive at that, because it wasn't consistent.
Yep.
And then I was simply told that things roll up in different ways, and then
Well, it was the challenge line is rolling up into that, so we
that was
can,
not, I gotta tell you, the fact that I never got that as a response, and it took me 3 weeks to figure it out, because I kept on saying, I don't understand how, when I'm raising the question, that Nick Riley isn't.
I'm
saying,
sorry,
"Here's-
I did
here's,
think that you had,
this amount, here's
I
that."
thought all along that you knew that, and that we would, you guys would, because it isn't really, nothing with the account within the budget changes. Where it rolls up into that summary is the only thing that changes. I'm sorry, I thought you had that information we decide where we thought it would be most appropriate to roll it up into. I don't really have necessarily, it's where the system is rolling it up to. I don't necessarily agree that it belongs in there either, so I was open to moving it to wherever you felt it was more appropriate, or together we felt it was more appropriate.
And then there's also the issue that, we keep coming back to, that I think is maybe a little more irksome this year with regard to the number of vacancies that we have in the APD. The listing of 7 recruits with having absolutely no funding next to it, and we sat here and we talked to Bridget about it, and she says, well, absolutely, we would have to amend the budget in order to actually hire, so.
That was something that Chief Sears and I had worked on a couple of years ago. It's really a number that even when they're fully operating they don't fill. Since we don't assign a vacancy savings to that department, we really use it as a way to, not only with the challenge line, but to add an additional specific vacancy savings to that, to really control the overall size of the budget. To add those 7 positions back in, which honestly, if we were going to do that, I'd probably have to just move determine a real savings number and move that into our overall vacancy savings. So either it doesn't really, whether it's there within that budget or whether it gets rolled into overall vacancy savings on that line, that's really the only real change. But it was kind of a point of a negotiation with Chief that we felt that it was a realistic number.
Now?
No, it was Chief Sears, and I explained why we did this with the current chief, and he said, well, what if we were to move up to that and get to that number, then clearly we would have to refund whatever positions were needed to do that. But historically, even when we're fully functioning, there's always a minimum of that and more in vacancies because of the rate that they retire.
I just feel like I'm not sure of the message that it is intended to send when you put down 297 people as staff in the police department and you only have funding for 200.
Like I said, we could put the funding in and then just move that savings over to the vacancy savings line.
It doesn't, I mean, it's one of those things, I understand what you're saying, but when you're actually looking at a budget.
No, I understand that.
It just, it's not.
Yep.
There should have been, that's more of an internal thing than actually a budget presentation
Right.
thing.
Dorothy, before you go, part of the question will be, what we get done tomorrow. Do you want to wait to talk about scheduling future meetings to deal with some of these other issues beyond what I've laid out as a goal for tomorrow? I'm talking about, part of it is I would prefer not to hold another meeting before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Either of the full council or of the finance committee, and come back before our meeting before our second meeting in December. We might be able to have you come in on December 2nd to provide
the
us
rates.
with information about the homestead rate.
Yeah,
And deal with
we
that
can do
in
that.
caucus.
All right.
So that's December
Yeah,
2nd, if you
and
could.
I also, Judy, I actually do think you make a valid point with, we definitely should have clearly expressed the change in debt service in the proposed book. So with that in mind, if the council is more comfortable moving it back and showing it in the way that it had been shown previously, that's not going to be anything that I would fight against. Like I said, budgetarily it's the same. It's just a matter of increasing the variance. So
That's great information. We can talk about that tomorrow.
because I really don't want that to be something we continue to go back and forth on, because from my perspective,
And the oddity is, what kind of saying is that the mayor was the person who basically said, put it where it was?
in her defense, I did give her a strong argument as to why I didn't like the variance within the budget. And she was, like I said, she was like, that's something that I put in, and because she thought that the council would, it's a way that they thought that the council would see this more effectively. But since I've been here, I feel that question of what this variance is every year. It was just a way to eliminate that variance. But I agree, we should have been far more expressive and upfront. My goal.
And you know that what essentially
Yeah,
what the OSC says?
yeah, my goal
is you put it on your revenue side, not as a revenue, but as a fund balance appropriation.
But it's not, right, and what it says is it's either done as a resolution or an appropriation. I guess the thought was that by doing a footnote and marking that difference would be, with the adoption process, would be tantamount to a resolution, or we could go back to how we had done it, which would be an appropriation. So that's kind of the thought process there, and I really thought that it was something that we would hash out throughout the process, but I definitely should have made
I
that
made a
far more
proposal
clear.
to change it back, and your response was, we're not going to agree to do that. So it kind of like left me kind of stumped. But
When-
I am officially adjourning
I
this
think,
meeting.
when did I